Instead of saying, Mom, you know you've had an Alzheimer's diagnosis and the doctor says you can't live alone and you can't, it's not safe and da 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 da. I would go, right? Who would want to leave your home? You have a beautiful home. I totally get that. Okay, here we go. This is part 2 of my series on dementia. And today, well, first of all, if you didn't watch part 1 yet, I will put a link to that right here. So you don't have to have watched part 1 to watch part 2. Part 1 is just where I went over signs and symptoms, the first things that were red flags, kind of what we all noticed. First of all and foremost, that we knew something was wrong with Mom. Where we left off last, we had gotten the diagnosis that Mom had dementia, moderate to late stage, which I think surprised us and also didn't surprise us. When we received the actual diagnosis, I flew in from Atlanta, went with Mom to the appointment, and I got to be there with her when she heard the information. She took it surprisingly well. Mom is, in her nature, wants to know everything about everything, especially when it comes to her own health. So she did have a lot of questions, and it was great to be there with her for the appointment, to be able to help her process, to write things down, and then to be able to go over them with her later. That was about 6 months ago. Since then, she has pretty much forgotten that she was there for that appointment. But I do think, and experts would agree, even if they won't remember the diagnosis, it's extremely important, and I would say even ethical, that you be in the room with them and that they hear the actual diagnosis. There is a dignity there. I think in this whole process, there's this tension between maintaining their dignity and keeping them safe. You can't always do both, but anytime you can, you put that in the win column. That has been my driving motivation and force, as it has been for all of us. So having her hear the actual diagnosis and respecting her, because it's not like she's had a lobotomy, right? She is still very much in there. There are lapses in her brain. I best heard it described as your brain has different rooms. And with dementia, the lights get either dimmed or turned off. And you have to understand that the essence of who she is still there. And in her clear moments, she is very clear. She understands everything that's happening. So we wanted to be sure we proceeded with dignity. So that was the big kind of motivation for making sure she heard the diagnosis, even though we knew it would be hard. If you are working with other siblings, I think we didn't even know how important this was until we kind of naturally started doing it. Figure out which thing you're good at and which thing you're not as good at. My mom can be very triggering for my sister. So my sister has taken kind of a behind the scenes role in getting particular things done with the house and the real estate and all of that. It helps that she's a realtor. My brother is very good with getting my mom to do practical things, the money and all of that. So he has kind of taken that. And I'm the one who kind of helps Mom with decisions, brings her comfort, helps her to come to her own conclusions. So we kind of all naturally have fallen into those roles. We have been communicating like never before, which has been an unexpected benefit, is that I feel like I'm closer with my siblings than I've ever been. There's been this strange healing that's gone on with me and my siblings that's been absolutely beautiful. So once we had the diagnosis, we knew for sure, that certain things just had to stop happening. They shared with us that within 3 months, she would be completely unable to live on her own, that actually she was unable to live on her own when she got the diagnosis, but that they knew that practically we would need to put some things into place. They were very clear with us, you need to move quickly. So we did. Now, as far as getting her to stop driving, this was probably the biggest bone of contention. She would not, she would tell us she wasn't driving, but we knew for a fact she was driving. At one point, my siblings actually tried to take her car away. She found out where it was and got her neighbors to drive her there. We tried every not in her face route to try to get this to happen, But I think she knew at this point that something was wrong, and that once she was no longer able to drive, that it was over. And she fought us like I have never seen, manipulated. She lied to us a lot. She would say, "Oh, I'm not driving, I'm not driving." And then we would hear from a neighbor that they saw her at Safeway. Like, she was lying. There was an incident that I found out later, after we took away her car keys, that she had gone for a drive. Where her house is, if you go right, you go up into the mountains, and if you go left, you go into town. She took a right and got so lost and disoriented that, according to her ranch hands, which I think were probably construction workers, or I don't know who it was, stopped her and were very worried about her, gave her water, and got her back on the right road. She lives in Arizona. Like, she could have died out in the middle of nowhere. And she did tell me later that she was starting to get very scared. There was one point where she was headed to the dentist, where she's been going for 20 years, and got lost and ended up at my sister, saying she couldn't figure out how to get to the dentist. So as a public safety, the car keys had to be taken away. After the botched car heist, I told both my siblings never to go into a life of crime because they would suck at it. I went out and I was looking at various options. You can call the local police department and have them come. You can report reckless driving. And depending on where you live, where my mom lives, there's a lot of retirees. So I did find out the police will come and take their keys. We did not want to do that because we felt like it would be very difficult for mom. But remember, at this point, she's also misplacing things regularly. She was regularly misplacing the car keys. So I just took them. I went all around the house. I found all of the extra copies of the keys, and I put them in a place in her house where I was fairly sure she would not be able to find them. It lasted long enough that the battery died on the car. My brother had already canceled the insurance on the car, so she couldn't call like the service through, like AAA or whatever, to come and restart the battery. So that solved our problem. And I think that was my biggest aha with like how to get her to do things, is don't try to fight with logic. Just try to make the thing that you don't want her to do impossible for her to do. Like, and when that light bulb went off, because I was used to my whole life with her logicking, that's not a word, but getting to where I needed her to go in a logical way, when you can't do that when you're working with someone with dementia. And it's not her fault. Her brain is lying to her. So you have to work within her reality to get her where you need her to go. For me, hiding her keys, yes, I felt a little guilty about it, but I also didn't want her taking out a family of 5 on their way to Walmart. Like, that was where I was thinking. Like, I was worried about her, but I was also worried about what she could do in her vehicle to someone else. And I was not willing to accept those consequences. So if you're not willing to accept the consequences, you have to do something drastic. So in our case, it was as simple as me hiding her keys. Once we got that piece done, and once we had the diagnosis, I was given the name of someone there in her town that helped place people, and she gave me some fantastic advice. She told me to get home health care in right away, gave me a great local agency, and then to get Meals on Wheels. Now, what I didn't understand about Meals on Wheels is it's not just the food. The food is fine, but they may not even eat the food. It's the fact that it is a very reasonably priced service. It's not free. You pay on a sliding scale. Mom actually has a pension from dad and fairly good Social Security. So for us, it was $9 a meal, and that will vary greatly depending on where you are in the country and that particular program. But where she was at the time, it was $9 per meal, and they would come Monday through Friday, and the volunteers actually show up, they look them in the eye, they have a chat, they give them their meal. If they do not answer the door, there were 2 emergency contacts, a neighbor and me. And if we can't get a hold of her, they call the police to do a wellness check. I cannot tell you the peace of mind that this gave us, because that meant, because she, at this point, she was just not answering her phone. And again, she would just say her phone didn't work. She didn't know what was wrong with it. Why do I keep paying all this money for all these phones? She would just not answer for days. So we were constantly having to call the neighbors. My sister was constantly running over there. We were always worried. And it was just no way to live. We were worried all the time. With home health care coming in 3 days a week, which unskilled home health care in her area was $40 an hour, so very expensive. Combination of that and Meals on Wheels meant that most days of the week, someone had eyeballs on her and was checking on her, which was essential and very important. And it gave us some margin to figure out what was going to happen next. It was really important that we had those things in place. At this point, we also now felt like we had advocacy with her palliative care doctor, with her primary care doctor. And it is amazing, once everyone is on the same page, how many resources there are available. The next big hurdle was getting mom to understand that she had to move into assisted living. Because with vascular dementia in particular, things can move very quickly. We knew that her living with any of us was not an option. She is already even now having incontinence issues, and it is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week proposition. And although, I could have moved her in with us probably 6 months, maybe a year, and it would have been mandatory that she be in a place where she could get professional care. So we knew that moving in with us was not a good option. We started looking at the financial situation. We realized that we would have to sell her home. She needed to move, and she needed to move quickly. Okay, convincing her of that. There were good days and bad days. We found a narrative that seemed to work, which was, you need to be in this care home until you are better. She's a very religious person, so she would say, so this is where I need to go until God heals me. And we have been on board with that narrative because it works with her mind. I can go home as soon as God heals me. Yes, you can go home as soon as God heals you. And she has even said, when I move back to Prescott, I'm okay with selling the house because I want to move to a smaller place that's more manageable. And we're like, great. We meet her in her reality. Sitting here saying this now, that sounds like, oh, it's just a piece of cake. Just meet her in her own reality. Just take away the car keys. Just figure out an assisted living. When I tell you that getting to this point in time, again, 2 miles up the road, she is settled at her assisted living facility, has been, I have run huge teams at a very kind of high-level job. I run my own business. I raised 3 sons. I had a 25-year career. I have never done anything more challenging in terms of moving parts and trying to coordinate things. Just the logistics of it alone really require a full-time project manager, let alone the emotional piece, let alone mom continuing to manipulate us as her kids. And I will say this about family dysfunction. All of the videos that I watched seem to say, and I don't know if this was they were being kind or what, but they were like, oh, my mom was just always so loving and so wonderful. My mom had issues. Our family had a lot of dysfunction. The dysfunction does not go away because now you're dealing with this dementia, and you're also not absolved of responsibility because of dysfunction in your family. We got to get through this. There is no way out of this but through it. The phone calls, the logistics, the trying to choose a place, the deciding where we're going to leave her up in the mountains or we were going to move her closer to my brother. Ultimately, we all decided it was much better for her to be here in the valley because I could visit her much more easily, and also better resources. My brother could be close, all of the things. Okay, fine. So took her on a couple of tours of places that she hated. And then my brother and sister-in-law found a place here in the valley that, thank God, she loved. And when they took her on the visit, she was happy, she was motivated. There were some bumps because she had thought she was going to be able to move to independent living. There was no way that was going to be an option. And these places do an assessment of your parent. So don't feel like you have to be the bad guy to tell them you have to be in assisted living or memory care or whatever it is. They will make that determination for you, which is helpful. We felt it was safe. We felt it was clean. We felt the people were very, very kind. These assisted living facilities run the gamut, by the way. There are places that are super, super bougie, and we took mom to a couple of those places, and it would have been a stretch for her financially, but we would have figured it out. She didn't feel at home in those places. She felt like it wasn't her style. So thankfully, the place we found was very much kind of in the middle of the road financially. It was within her budget without needing supplementing from us. And yeah, she found a place that she loved. Her deciding to move had multiple 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, multiple days where she said, I'm not going anywhere. Multiple days where she was very clear that we were all trying to kidnap her. We wanted our money. We wanted her house. We wanted her car, her 1998 Toyota minivan. And the big lesson for me there was you just keep moving forward with the right decision, because the truth was there was no choice. We had to make this move. And I've used this analogy before, but once it clicked for me that it was kind of like when your kids are little and they're overtired and they're crying, I don't want to go to bed, I don't want to go to bed. And as a parent, you go, absolutely, I wouldn't want to go to bed either. Let's go ahead and brush your teeth. I don't want to go to bed, I don't want to go to bed. Absolutely. Let's go ahead and get in bed and read a story. And you just move through the steps, and before you know it, the child who didn't want to go to sleep is asleep. That is how I approached it with Mom. Once I shifted that, I felt like everything calmed down. Because instead of what was happening at first was on the days when she would be on the phone with me going, I'm not leaving this house, I'm never leaving this house, I'm going to die in this house. Instead of saying, Mom, you know you've had an Alzheimer's diagnosis and the doctor says you can't live alone and you can't, it's not safe and da-da-da-da. I would go, right? Who would want to leave your home? You have a beautiful home. I totally get that. And that's it. I didn't argue with her. I didn't say that I never said like, sorry, you have to move. I just let her talk. And what I started noticing is if I didn't argue with her, she would eventually wind herself back down. She would either change the subject, she would start to convince herself of a different reality, there would be some distraction, I could change the subject. There was a myriad of things. If I fought her on her logic in that moment, we circled the drain and it was horrific. And I would hang up scared, shaking, worried. And they talk, when you call the Alzheimer's line or when you talk to someone who is a dementia care specialist, and also make sure if your parent has specialists they're working with, make sure that you're on the list so that you can talk to the clinicians. But once I met her in her reality and started going along with it, I wasn't hanging up the phone, shaking and crying and worrying. In those circles, they have a term called the big incident, and it's called different things. But most people that end up in assisted living, their family has been trying to get them to move for months, if not years, and they finally end up there because of the big incident. The big incident can be a stroke, a heart attack, a car accident, falling down the stairs, setting the house on fire, eating something poisonous. Eating something poisonous is a huge danger with people with dementia. In fact, she said to me a couple weeks before she moved, she had eaten a candy that tasted really weird, and I was like, oh my God, did she eat a Tide Pod? And it sounds ridiculous, but it actually happens because they just get so confused about what is edible and what is not. They're like a toddler. You really want to avoid the big incident, and here's why. And if that's what happens with your reality, don't beat yourself up over it. But the big incident means you have no choices. So even if your parent is saying, hell no, I won't go, okay, make plans anyway. Because then when the big incident happens, you at least have an idea. Maybe they've already visited the place that you have in mind for them. If you haven't done any of that, the big incident happens, they're in the hospital, then choices will be made for you, and your parent could end up in a crap hole. Sorry, but there are some terrible places. And then it becomes an emergency, and then you don't have any choice. So that is why this whole process is so important and lengthy and maddening, because you don't want to wait for the big incident. It is much happier, healthier, safer, better outcome if you can move them sooner rather than later. If you can move them before their confusion is so great that they really don't know what's going on, and then they really are just like a scared child. I would say we moved Mom 6 months too late, but still within a timeline that meant we avoided the big incident. And I'm so, so grateful. I just did not think this day would come. And I do still feel like I'm oversimplifying the process. Those of you that have been in it know how hard this is. The fact that we were able to work together, me and my siblings, the fact that we were able to know when to give her choice, because we did want to give her as much agency as possible, right? Again, dignity versus safety. So we gave her as much choice as we could, but then realizing when it was time for us to just move forward. And you're not lying. There were a lot of things we omitted. There's a lot of things even now when I talk to her, things that she will bring up, and I either change the subject, and if I can't change the subject, I just listen to her and I don't respond and I let her wind down. It's a different reality. It's a different way of relating to your parent. You do get used to it. And the truth is, this could last a very long time. So that's how I want to end this video, is as an admonition, which is stronger than an encouragement. An admonition is like, that's a serious word, right? That's saying, I am telling you, this is what you must do. As their caregiver, whether you're the caregiver that lives in town, the caregiver that lives remotely, wherever you are, you must take care of yourself. If you are not okay, you cannot take care of your parent. And you think you're not doing enough. And this came from Aisha at the 800 Alzheimer's number. I will put that number down here, and I will also put it in the description box. She said, Jennifer, there is no amount of care you could give that would be enough. I could wake up every morning and give mom every ounce of emotional, physical, spiritual energy that I have, and it still would not be enough. And I would sacrifice my marriage, my relationship with my kids, my work, my own relationships, my friendships. You can't do it. You can't do it. You have to give what you can. Understand it will not be enough, but even if you gave everything, it would not be enough. Maintain their dignity and keep them safe. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I will provide resources in the description box that are from experts, people that are not just me, sharing my own story. In our next edition, we are going to talk about what I have learned about Alzheimer's and things that have really helped me along the way from a clinical perspective that I hope will be helpful to you as well. And then in the final video, we're going to talk about changes I'm making to my own personal life and habits that will help hopefully prevent Alzheimer's, or at least slow it down in my own life. And I hope you're having a great day, and yeah, talk to you soon.